going on, everybody? Welcome to the very first episode of Calle y Negocios. I'm your host, Tommy, and I want to start by saying thank you to everybody who's tuning in today to my first episode. This podcast is going to be a little bit about everything. We're going to talk about business, life, funny stories, lessons learned, and conversations with people from all different businesses and backgrounds. For the first episode, I want to keep it simple and just, introduce myself. A lot of people see what I'm doing now, but they don't really know where I came from or, what I've been through or why I decided to start this podcast in the first place. So today we're going to talk about, who I am, why and how I started my first business, and why I created this podcast called Calle y Negocios. But for the first topic I want to get into is, who I am. Most of you see me through social media like Instagram and TikTok, but there's always more to someone than just their social media life. A little bit about me is I was raised in the San Fernando Valley. For the first 6 years of my life, I was an only child, and Spanish was the only language I spoke to around 7 or 8 years old. From what my parents tell me, I was always, a pretty quiet and responsible kid. I was never the loudest in the room. I was always very shy and to myself. I never really got in trouble, to be honest. I was the type of kid, who listened and always tried to do the right thing. And even if I was hanging around bad influences or people who were going in the wrong direction of life, I feel like I was always very level-headed and very mature for my age. And, I never got into trouble, So when I was younger, I always just found myself thinking about, the future more than most people around me, and that's why I believe I made certain choices to get me to where I am today. But when I was 12, that's when my parents got divorced, and that was one of the big moments that shaped me to who I am today. It changed a lot in my life, and it forced me to grow up faster than I expected, I had to be the man of the house at a young age and become a role model for my younger siblings at the same time. And my dad was never out of the picture. He still isn't out of the picture, but he's never been a good role model for me. So I've always had to, figure things out on my own, and just to be a good role model for my brother and sister and a good support system for my mom. I feel like at the same time also to prove people wrong, even though my dad's a good guy and stuff like that, he's not very responsible. He's an alcoholic, he's always drinking. So people would always assume before that he's gonna turn out like his dad, especially because I started drinking at a young age. So because of that, because of those people, those doubts, I feel like it gave me more drive and motivation to prove those people wrong, But growing up, we weren't poor. We weren't well off either. We were like middle class, I want to say. But because of that, I learned early, on, that if I wanted something in life, I had to work hard for it. I've always wanted more of life, not because I wasn't grateful for what I had or for what my mom gave me and stuff like that, but because I knew there was more to life, I've always been ambitious, the idea of improving myself, always wanting to build something that can make, a difference for my family, my future family, myself, because I saw my mom struggle and I felt the struggle myself, and I wanted to break that, that cycle, that legacy, whatever you want to call it. I've worked, different jobs. I worked at Six Flags, I worked at In-N-Out, but that's why, I started my business when I was 19, because one thing about me is I've always been down to take risks. I've never been scared to make mistakes, and learn, lessons the hard way. I feel like every success has taught me something, and every failure has taught me something even more, And those are the experiences that helped me realize that growth comes from being willing to keep going, even when things don't work out the way you expect. And, before you guys think that I started this podcast because I have all the answers and because I know everything, I actually don't. I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I'm still figuring out things out every day. And that's the reason for this podcast, because I wanted to start this and, have a place where I could, share my thoughts and, share my experiences, my story, and just have honest conversations with other people from business owners to, regular people, and just people that are trying to chase their own goals and dreams as well, whether we're talking about business, life, relationships, success, failure, or the lessons that, we pick up along the way. And my goal is to keep it real and have a connection with people, that I relate to, and, have, regular conversations, but, that's enough of that. I feel like, for the next topic that I want to talk, want to get into is before, Tommy's Auto Detail, before, I started my first business, whatever. There was I started, a business back then, which my first business was selling Gatorade in middle school. So I used to, have my mom buy me a big Gatorade. It wasn't there was a small one, there was a skinny one, and there was a big old jug. So what I used to do is I used to freeze it in the freezer and throw it in my backpack. And I would throw it in my backpack, and then, I would go to school, and then I would drink some out of it all day. That was my Gatorade or whatever. Because back then, pues estaba chonchito, you know? And pues I would take it to school, and then, you know, people would be like, hey, let me get some Gatorade. So I would fill up their Gatorade bottle and I'll sell it for like $1, you know? So my mom would buy it for me, and then I would sell it, and then that's the money I used to, you know, buy stuff at the students for like a cookie or another Gatorade or whatever the case was. Because back then I had a friend, and his mom always gave him money. Like, she'll give him like $20 a day for the student store. So he would buy all of us stuff, you know? But at one point, I'm like, pues échenle pluma. Like every day, you know, like every day he would buy us something. So I'm like, at the same time, I don't want to, you know, be that guy. Like here comes this fool again, you know? So that's why I started selling, you know, Gatorade to make money. And then from then I started selling chips, like in 8th grade. And then from there on, it kept going to high school. And then my first struggle, my first like, you know, the first business struggle was getting caught in school. You know, I got caught my freshman year, and the dean told my baseball coach at the time, and then I was all scared. I was like, fuck, you know, like I got caught. So I tried to convince him, because he liked my Oakleys at the time. So I was like, if you don't get me in trouble, I'll give you my Oakleys, I'll sell them to you. He was like, yeah, I'm down, but nah, ni madre. So he told me he was down, but he still, you know, took my chips away. And pues yo también, you know, selling right in front of the student store. I was selling right in front of the student store, just posted, people coming up to me, you know, getting que chamoy, que tapatío, que esto, que el otro. And pues así, you know, pues how was I not gonna get caught, you know? But then, you know, from then, I started, in high school I sold chips, I cleaned shoes. Just because, you know, I've always been a hustler. I always, you know, had to make money somehow. My mom, you know, we struggled, you know, so I needed money for Cars Jr. I needed money for the ice cream truck after school, and that's how, you know, that's how I made my money, and that's how I got to, you know, buy my food. Even though, like, here and there, you know, my mom would, you know, here's $10, you know, back then was a $5 meal at Cars Jr. So con eso, pues like $6 armaba, you know. But that was one of the first, you know, the first businesses that I think I would start, I guess you can say, you know. That's how the salesman in me started. And the first struggle was all waking up early to, you know, go buy the box of chips at Food Fuerza Vallarta, because the night before they would sell out. You know, they wouldn't have the good ones, they would have the nasty ones. And but así se hizo, you know, whatever. But that's a little bit about that, you know. And then now, you know, for what, you know, the good stuff is, you know, how I started Tommy Autodito, the person that inspired me, you know, what made me start all this, you know. The person who made me start this was my best friend at the time. I was working at an AC company, and I hated my job, you know. I was making like $19-20 an hour, and I was like, I had a car payment at the time. Well, still have a car payment, but my car payment was like, you know, I was like, bro, like, ni traigo para las tortillas, like, you know? So I hated my job, and then he kept telling me, like, bro, start your own business. And I was just like, nah, but like, I don't know what. Because I never knew what I wanted to start, you know? But he finally brought the idea to me, you know. He took me on a ride along one day, and then he was like, let me just take you with me, like, check it out. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, pues, you know, it's cool. Like, we don't lose anything, you know? So he took me, and the first place he took me was a client in Porter Ranch, one of his, like, biggest clients at the time. He had 2 Rolls Royce, he had a G-Wagon, he had a McLaren and a Ferrari, I believe. And, you know, so I pull up, and I'm, like, in shock already. I'm like, damn, I'm about to whip a Rolls Royce, you know? So I'm in there taking pictures, boom, boom. I think for the gram, you know, I was posting on Instagram at the time on my stories. And then, so yeah, we watched those cars. Next client, Landon McBroom, you know, and I was like, oh shoot. So I was even in more shock when I pull up there, and then I'm like, bro, I watch his brother, you know, the Ace family. So it was even more like, okay, like, you get to do rich people, you get to do nice ass cars, you get to sit in a Rolls Royce, and then he would let me drive them off the driveway and stuff like that, you know. So then I get to, you know, I was driving them. So I was like, okay, like, this is cool. Like, I could see myself doing this. But whatever, so that went on, and then here comes the first payday. He gives me my first day. He gave me like $450, and I looked at it, and I was like, bro, like, I don't make nowhere near this at my job, you know. And of course, you know, I was working all day with him, but still, like, compared to making, like, I don't know, 120, 150, whatever it was, to now making $450 for one day, it was like, bro, pues, that's like my whole car payment, you know. It's my whole, like, whatever, you know. Like, that's $450 is a lot. So that's when, you know, I started, like, okay, like, I could see myself doing this. And then that's when I started making an idea in my head, like, okay, I'm gonna start a business. Started putting this plan together, told my mom about it. Next day, boom, I wake up and I tell my cousin, hey, let's go to the Ford. Like, I'm gonna start a business. Like, what are you gonna start? Like, what are you gonna do, you know? And I was like, I'm gonna become a detailer. And then, my best friend at the time used to wash my car and my cousin's car at work. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna do what he does, you know? He's like, oh, okay, well, pues ya que, you know? Pues hay que darle. So we wake up, I call him, we go to Ford. I tell him, hey, mom, I'm gonna buy a van today. She's like, nah, you're crazy. And I'm like, trust, I'm gonna buy a van today. So then I go, start doing the paperwork, payment, ridiculous. Like, you can't even imagine how ridiculous this payment was. So I called her and I'm like, hey, mom, so one thing about me is me and my mom are like, we're close, you know, so I never ask her for permission, but I always ask her for like advice, you know. So I called her and then I was like, hey, mom, like, what do you think? Like, this, how much is gonna cost? I'm putting this much down, boom, boom. And she was like, no, you're crazy. She's like, don't do that. You don't know what you're doing. Like, just chill. Like, think about it first. Like, look at other options. Go look in the street, boom, boom. So I sit there and then I was just looking at the paper and I go, all right, yeah, that's cool. Hang up, tell the guy, I'm doing it, let's do it. So I start signing the paperwork, you know. Mind you, this whole time I had another car. So I had my regular car, now I'm buying a business vehicle, right? So business van, price tag out the roof during COVID. Everybody wanted these trucks. The guy's like, bro, you take this one, it's the last one. So take it now or, regret it forever. So I was like, all right, cool. Boom, se hizo. I pull up to my house. My cousin pulls up behind me. She sees my car. She's like, what the hell are you doing? Starts like yelling at me and she starts stressing out. She's like, you only pulled up with the water tank. Where's the pressure washer? Where's the generator? Where's the towels? Where's the chemical? Like, ¿dónde está lo demás? Like, what the hell? So I was like, no, mom, like, chill. Like, se va a hacer, like, just chill, So next day, well, not even, like, still going to. So that day, I walk in and then she's like, go buy stuff, like, what are you doing? And I'm like, mom, like, chill, She starts, like, just going off. So I'm like, damn, bro. So I'm at agüité, so I went to the garage and I have a Peloton. So I hop on the Peloton and I'm sitting there and I just started bawling. I was like, damn, bro, like, my mom don't believe in me. She's stressed. I'm stressed. I'm in debt. Have 2 car payments. I'm like, I have rent. I have my bills. And I make $19 an hour. And I was like, what am I going to do now? Like, what's next, But I'm like, no, like just, stay focused. Because one thing about me, like, I've always been down to take risks, So whatever, the next day I wake up, start buying everything. Yeah, I get home. She's like, okay, like Seba said, like she saw equipment coming in, boom, boom. And at the time, like, it was like, I was like, okay, like, what's next now? Like, I got the stuff. Now I got to start getting clients, but where do I start? So I told my cousin, I was like, hey, I'm going to start taking Fridays off. I'm going to start detailing my, my coworkers' cars. So that's where it started, and then from there, family members, friends. And one thing about business, when you start a business, you start to figure out who your real friends and, who your family is, like who your real family is, pues, because once you start a business, the real ones support you, and the ones that hate, they're not going to support you. They're not going to repost your stuff. And that's one tip, to take when you start a business. That's when you're going to realize, like, who fucks with you and who doesn't. But anyways, that's off topic. But yeah, so I went on, and then I started taking clients. By 2 months, I'm like, all right, Tito, I'm quitting my job. And he was like, damn, like, for real? I was like, yep, I'm quitting my job. It's going good. Like, it's up right now, It was during COVID, so everybody had money, stimulus checks and, all that. So I quit my job 2 months in. Still had all these, had 2 cars still, right? But whatever, I'm quitting. In my head, I'm like, I'm doing good. I'm paying everything. I'm doing good. Ando gastando. I'm going out, boom, boom, living comfortably, living a good life, no sé qué. So yeah, I go on, and then come December, rainy season. And that was the first, like, whoa, okay. Like, what do I do now, So now it comes in, like, make a decision now, So I call a bunch of people, like, hey, how do I sell my car? I called one of my homies at the time. And I was like, hey, bro, like, where's your pop sell his cars? I need to sell my car. And he's like, what do you mean? Like, sell your car? I'm like, yeah, I need to sell it, like, by 2 weeks. My payment is due in 2 weeks, and I don't think I'm going to have this payment. And I'm like, I'm stressing, because one thing about me, my credit. I was like, no, like, I cannot ruin my credit, So whatever, I end up selling the car on time. And then, yeah, the payment goes through. Like, the guy's like, don't even worry about it. Like, it's going to be taken care of. The car got sold. So now, that happens, right? So now I go on, and then my van gets broken into. So now I'm like about a year in. It's about, February, March, I believe, the next, 2022 now, and my van gets broken into. And so I wake up early morning, had a 7 a.m. client every Saturday. So I wake up and I'm walking down. I slept at my buddy's house at the time. And I wake up and, where he lives, it's a main street, so I would always park in the street, But there's one day I parked it too far down. So I walk down the hill, boom, boom. And then I open first I see my hose hanging out. And then I'm like, what the hell? So I, open it, throw it in. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Then I look and I'm like, my ladder's in my driver's, like my driver's seat. And I was like, did I do that? I was like, I don't know. I don't think I did that, but I was like, oh, whatever. And then I look and I don't see a pressure washer. Still not clicking, still not, processing. I'm like, pressure washer's gone. All right, whatever. And then I look at my window's broken. And I was like, okay, boom. I'm like, they robbed you, So then I start calling. Who did I call first? I called my sister-in-law. Had called, my concuño. And then I was like, hey, bro, like, they just broke. And then I was like, boom, boom, like, they broke into my stuff. Everyone starts coming. He starts coming back home. And they feel bad because it's outside their house. And me, I'm just there, like, crying. I'm just like, bro, like, I just lost everything. Like, everything I worked hard for. Like, something I started from nothing, like, it's gone. Like, now if I want to start all over again, I got to buy everything again, And, bro, like, this stuff's not, it's not cheap. It's not $200-300 like people think. Like, those YouTube videos that people be like, oh, I started detailing business with $100. Like, nah, like, this was way more than $100, So then I start calling my clients, like, yeah, I can't make it. I got robbed. So I'm freaking out, whatever. Luckily for me, I was fortunate enough to have, him. And he's been in the business, I think now at that time for like 2 years before me. So he already had his connections. His brother's been in the business for years too. So, like, he went up to the stores. He's like, hey, bro, what, this happened? Boom, boom. Like, you think, you could, like, give him the stuff and he'll pay you back later? And he was like, yeah, bro, like, cool, It's one of the biggest struggles that I had in the beginning. And then, another struggle is, like, you lose people, When you have a business, you start losing, your relationships, your friends, start losing everything little by little. It's like when you have a business, it's stressful. So, you don't give much time to people. You focus sometimes too much on your business, and it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing at the same time. But you gotta have one thing. They always say, like, oh, you don't need a team to start a business. Just start it by yourself, and poco a poco se va creciendo. But the truth is, like, even if you don't have a socio, you don't have, a business partner, you got to have a strong team behind that. The team behind closed doors, your girlfriend, your wife, your mom, your brother, your sister, because those are the things that keep you strong and keep you looking forward, because there'll be days where you don't know how you're going to make it out. There'll be days where, you might not be able to, eat sometimes, you might not even have enough money for gas to get to your client's house. And you're like, damn, bro, like, how am I going to do it? Like, I got to put gas and I'm only going to get paid from this client. And these are realities. When you're first starting a business, like, you're getting money you're trying to, make money from everything. And plus, you gotta be strong. You gotta be ready for the stress. You gotta be ready for the struggle. It's a hard ride in the beginning, but I feel like it's always worth it. I mean, for me, when I look at it now, like, I look back at the struggles that I used to go through. I remember looking, like, looking at the ceiling and just like, okay, how am I gonna do it? Like, I gotta figure it out somehow, like, I got my bills, and at the time I had a girlfriend. And you gotta do all these things. And one thing about me is I don't like to, like, if I struggle, and I'll keep it in, and I won't tell people I'm struggling. Only the two people in my life at the time, which my mom, obviously, and then my girlfriend at the time, were the only two people that knew that I was struggling. I was like, okay, like, I'm struggling, but I gotta, I can't, like, no one can find out. Like, I gotta just figure it out. One thing about me is always figure it out. But those are some of the struggles, For me, I think, I believe, not that I believe, but I'm happy the route I went, there's things I do differently, there's things that sometimes I think about, I'm like, damn, like, you should have not bought a van, you should have started with the older van, you should have put more effort into making videos. One thing about me is I'm shy to be on camera, so it's like, if I was comfortable like I am now to be on camera back then, maybe my business would have been more, it would have been more bigger than what it is now, because people want to interact, people want to see my face, people want to see who's washing their car, people like seeing videos and stuff like that. But me, I'm like, I'm just here to wash your car and that's it. But that's some of the things that I do differently. But other than that, I feel like that's a little bit about that. Later on in the future, we'll talk more. But for now, I want to jump into like the topic 3, which is why I started a podcast. You know, how I started why I started Calle y Negocios. And pretty much is because, you know, Calle y Negocios is pretty much, you know, like, it's social media at the end of the day. It's a YouTube channel. And the new trend is, you know, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, and etc. You know, so now it's like, okay, now you gotta look, you know, a different lane. You gotta start. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, pretty much. You know, so have my detailing. I want to start this. I have Oveja Negra. Hopefully to start soon. But that's another thing too. That me, I like doing things legit. So for doing a podcast, I've been wanting to do a podcast for years. You know, for years and years. Probably since I was like 19, probably 19 or 18 when I had a couple friends back then. And I would always tell them, like, bro, let's start a podcast. Let's start a podcast. And it was gonna be called Buzz Talks at the time. That was the name, you know, Buzz Talks, because Buzz Balls, I think, was trending at the time. So I was like, bro, con eso se hace, Buzz Talks, and we'll just go on there and chop it up, you know. So that's where the whole idea of podcast came up, and I've always liked podcasts. And then so yeah, so that was, you know, I've always wanted to do it, but just never had the, you know, the courage to do it, and also because I hate being on camera, you know, and stuff like that. But anyways, why I named it Calle y Negocios, why I combined them both, is because what Calle means is Calle pretty much, you know, struggle, you know, life experiences, coming from nothing, the hood. And then Calle too is like, you know, when I have people on here, I want to be able to, you know, sometimes just chop it up. You know, you don't have to be a business owner to be on here, you know. We could just talk about, you know, like, hey, bro, like, remember that time we kicked it in high school? Remember that time we kicked it at that party? Boom, boom. And then negocios just means, you know, growth, success, building something. For me, like, you know, I think financial freedom when I think about a business, stuff like that. So that's why I put Calle y Negocios. That's why I combine them both, because I feel like, you know, they make a good, you know, like, it rolls off the tongue good. You know, in my head it sounded super, you know, super good, whatever. But the future vision is, you know, to have a bunch of guests on here, from mariscos to antojitos to hat brands to detailers to barbers to, you know, músicos to, you know, I don't know, people that make micheladas, nail tech / techs, lo que sea. And the future vision also is for me to have, you know, segments. You know, this is just one, you know, one scenario, but I want to have like a guest on here, put a carne asada. You know me, I love to cook. I love to have people over at my house all the time. You know, put steaks, you know, maybe a tomahawk on there or something like that. And then just, you know, record and just have a, you know, a raw conversation with them. And I feel like people are going to enjoy that, because I enjoy that with other podcasts from that. But, you know, for now, I think that's, you know, a little bit about why I started this, you know, this podcast. I think, you know, that's enough for this video. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning into my first episode. You know, it means a lot that you took the time to listen and watch. If you enjoyed this episode, you know, make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment, share with your friends, family. You know, follow me on Instagram, TommyAlcala24. I'll put all the, the ads on the bottom in the description, and, you know, just follow me and so you can see what I got coming next. And big shout out to my boys from All In, Rich and Ivan. Thank you for supporting the podcast. You know, check out their hats, check out their Instagrams. I'll put in the description. You know, they have a bunch of collabs with Julio Cesar. They have Tomateros, Grupo Supremo, I believe. And we have something coming big as well. Stay tuned for that. It's a big thing. But other than that, I want to hear from you guys. You know, drop a comment below. Let me know what you guys think, what you want to see next. Whether it's, you know, a business topic or a guest you want to get on here, or, you know, I don't know, life stories, what do you want to listen to, what do you want to watch, you know, business advice or anything else in general. But for now, thank you again for all the support. It means a lot, truly. And I'm out of here. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.